welcome. On this podcast, we explore everything around self-healing, health, personal growth, the mind-body connection, relationships, and more. Hey everyone, welcome back. Today I am speaking to Chandler Johnson. Welcome, Chandler.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, happy to have you because I reached out on Instagram. We have been following each other for a while and I just really resonate and love the content you post and your own stories. So really looking forward to delving into that. So Chandler is a chronic pain recovery coach, a certified holistic life coach, certified mind-body syndrome TMS practitioner. She has an MA in clinical psychology with an emphasis in marriage and family therapy. And importantly, she created MindBody Chic, which is a mental health and wellness platform with a focus on nervous system regulation and overcoming chronic conditions. That's a lot.
That was great. That was such a great summary.
Really focused on getting that. Let's just start. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what has led you here.
Yeah, well, thank you for that great introduction. So I'm Chandler. Like you stated, I started Mindfully Chic, and it really was started from my own journey with chronic health issues, mental health, the importance of both, and the importance and the way that both play on each other. So for me, I previously worked as an associate marriage and family therapist, and I worked with the homeless population. And I also worked as a luxury wardrobe stylist. So that's where the name Mindfully Chic comes together. Completely different areas, but two things that I'm really passionate about. So that's where that name came from. But for me, I dealt with chronic illness for over a decade. IBS, fibromyalgia, TMJ, just kind of things here and there. But in 2020 was when everything really snowballed. So I woke up in the middle of the night with a hemiplegic migraine, which at the time I had no idea what it was, but it's a really severe migraine attack that causes paralysis and weakness throughout your body, severe pain all throughout your body, but especially in your head. For me, it was the right side of my head and my face and my neck. And from then on, I experienced cluster headaches and daily migraine attacks. So those migraine attacks lasted for weeks. I was having a severe attack in the middle of the night every single night. That led to daily head pain. So every single day I had pain in my head, face and neck, and dizziness, nausea, heart racing, anxiety, all of those chronic symptoms. Like basically any chronic symptom you can think of, I had it. And that lasted for years. So that really started my work.
Thank you so much for sharing because, one thing I found moving through chronic symptoms is you think you're the only person going through that. And, a lot of people think, well, I've got multiple diagnoses. So therefore a mind-body approach won't work for me. Whereas what I find with myself and a lot of my clients who have used the mind-body approaches, there are several symptoms, there are several diagnoses, and symptoms are persisting. So you were dealing with daily pain. How did you go about getting a diagnosis, and what sort of diagnoses were you given? Where did you start?
Yeah, so when I was first before I had that really severe attack, I was having just random pressure in my face. And I didn't know exactly what it was because from my knowledge, I had never had a migraine attack. So migraine was never on the table for me, but my ENT actually referred me to a neurologist and said, I think you're having migraine. And I was like, no, this is just I think it's sinus pressure because I had really bad allergies and I had sinus issues. And he was like, no, you need to go to the neurologist. So I saw a neurologist, but just because I was having those little symptoms, I kind of wrote it off. And then when I woke up in the night with that severe pain, that's when I was like, okay, maybe they're right. Like this is migraine. So I got the diagnosis of chronic migraine, even though it falls into so many different headache categories. So it started with that chronic migraine diagnosis. I was put on so many different medications, so many side effects, all of that. And then it just continued to pile on. Like my neck had so much pain. So I was diagnosed with occipital neuralgia. So now I'm going to a pain management doctor where I'm getting steroid injections and pain medication, and I'm getting Botox injections, and I'm doing all of this. And so it just continued spiraling. And every time I went to the doctor, I was like sent to a new specialist. So I was sent to someone to check for POTS. So I went to like a cardiologist. I was diagnosed with interstitial cystitis. So I went to a urologist, and it just constantly, it just constantly piled on. So, as you can imagine, I just had so much anxiety just thinking about, okay, it seems like every day there's something new, something's worsening. I'm getting a new medication. So yeah, everything just piled on, really.
Yeah, and I think, when there is more than one label and it feels like something that started out being contained and then it doesn't feel contained, plus the fact that you don't even know what you're dealing with or the tests are coming back normal, no one can give you answers. It's so stress-inducing. I fully understand how hard that is. It sounds like you followed the typical path to trying to get well, trying all the medications, taking the steps. Nothing seemed to be working very well. Was there anything that did work and you had success with?
Yeah, there were things that worked for a short amount of time. And when I say worked, nothing really worked, but some things I felt improvement. Like I took so many medications, and eventually I was on this medication that actually was meant for Alzheimer's, but for some reason they also treated people with migraine with it. And that actually worked the best. So that was interesting. But I did physical therapy, which, it would help for a couple days and then get worse. Things like vestibular therapy worked better for dizziness because, vestibular therapy helps you take the fear out of the dizziness, which, is the basis of my work, is decreasing fear. But back then, I didn't realize that's what it was doing. So that did help some. But for the most part, really eventually finding this mind-body approach is what helped me no longer have chronic symptoms.
Yeah. So I'm curious how you got to the point, or where you actually even discovered a mind-body approach to healing chronic symptoms, because what I find is unless you stumble across it or unless you hear a lot of people that have really positive experiences, it can be a completely different way of thinking. How did you get to this point of desperation where a mind-body approach was something you started looking into?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So let's go back a little bit. So this was in 2020 when all of this was happening. I was working as an associate marriage and family therapist. I had just left the wardrobe stylist job and started my first big girl job doing therapy. And this is when all of this happened. So eventually I had to go on disability leave. And so I left my job. I couldn't work. I was so debilitated. I couldn't even look at screens like how we're talking like this. I couldn't do that. I was in so much pain all the time. And so disability, short-term disability, lasts a year. So they'll pay you out for a year and then you have to apply for permanent disability. So it was October 2021 and I applied for permanent disability and I got denied because usually with migraine and a lot of chronic conditions, they just don't approve you. They're like, nope, you can figure it out. It's not serious. And it's yeah. So at this point, I really hit a rock bottom. So that was October. We moved into November. Still was I don't know what I'm going to do for work. At this point, I was living with my husband now, but he was my boyfriend at the time. We were in LA, still in a pandemic, and just literally one income, not knowing when I could work, just complete rock bottom. And I had heard of mind-body syndrome before, but I really just wrote it off because I was my symptoms are way too severe. And obviously I was in psychology. I worked as a therapist, so I knew about the mind-body connection. I always loved learning about the brain. So I knew that like emotions impact your body, and I knew how powerful the brain was. But I think that when you're in it, you just really can't believe that it will help you, because you think your stuff is so severe.
Yeah, you think you're so severe, you're so different. Plus, like, it takes so much to try and convince people that you are in pain or that you're struggling. And
Yeah.
it's your illness, it's not something that in your head per se, but it's something you have to really try and convince people of. Like, I'm really struggling. I know the tests are normal, but this is something I'm dealing with. So what I found when I got to that point of mind-body, opening up to the mind-body connection, is like, I just wanted to make sure no one felt they were dismissive of the pain because it was a brain approach or a mind-body approach. It felt quite hard for me to mentally get to that point, even though, like you, I had studied psychology, just my bachelor's. I knew about the power of emotions, but it was still quite a big jump to get there, really look into it.
Yeah, definitely. That's exactly where I was at too. And, my dad passed away in 2018, and I knew that grief had impacted my symptoms, but I didn't realize to this extent, and other things, definitely impacted my symptoms. Like, I needed to set stronger boundaries. I wasn't aligned in my career path, and, I wanted to do something a little different, but I didn't think that they were really at the root. Especially when you're dealing with all of these conditions, you just think like there's some medical mystery that's going on here. They're just not finding things, any little incidental finding, whether it was a scan or a blood test, I would just latch on like, oh, this has to be it. We have to fix this now. And then it's like, okay, that didn't work. Or a doctor's like, okay, this isn't going to help you. So I was really at a rock bottom, and I ended up dealing with insomnia for like 2 weeks straight. Like, I just was just so stressed about this. I was like, what am I going to do? I have to work. I have to figure this out. So I believe that I just started searching podcasts, because I had gotten it really into podcasts actually, like during the pandemic. And I think I searched like how to cure pain or something like that. And this podcast came up about mind-body syndrome, or TMS, neuroplastic pain, and everything is under that same umbrella. And I started listening to it, and it was people on there talking about the same thing as me. Like, I'm dizzy every day. I have head pain every day. And on this podcast, they talked a lot about how fear plays a role in your symptoms. And when you've been dealing with this for a long time and everything's coming up normal, there's no answers, you're just, quote, managing, and you're not really managing. It's something called mind-body syndrome. And your brain is playing a pivotal role in your symptoms. So for me, having such a psychological background and loving science, like my dad was a scientist, he was a molecular biologist, I've always loved science and the human body. So with someone breaking it down that way, and this is how the brain works, and this is what's happening, really resonated with me. Like, it just felt like something clicked. And I think also because I was at that rock bottom, I was like, well, I'm going to try anything. Like, this is making sense to me. This kind of seems like so miraculous, but like, I'm just going to try it. So I reached out to a center that focused on mind-body syndrome. I learned more about it. And when I had a consultation with them, like, just the fact that they were saying this is something that you can overcome, that was the first time someone really said, like, you don't have to deal with this forever. Luckily, I had a good neurologist that, was like, we can get this under control. Like, I know we can do it, which is great.
Giving you like timelines or
Yeah, there was like no timeline or anything. And this was the first person that was like, no, we've seen this like in our practice. Like, this is something that we can work through. So I did brain retraining work for 8 weeks, and I was actually able to go back to work. And it was huge. Like, I had no idea when I was going to be able to work. I knew that I didn't want to go back to being a therapist. Especially because I was working for Department of Mental Health. It was so much paperwork, just so taxing. And I knew that my like nervous system was not ready to jump back into that. So I actually went back being a wardrobe stylist, and I was on my feet all day, 9 hours a day, talking to people under bright lights, music, everything I feared, honestly, for 2 years, I was able to go back and do. And I just continued to get better from then. And within about 6 months, I was completely off of all of my medications, like feeling back to my normal life. And I just, I realized how much not only the grief was playing into my symptoms, the fear about the symptoms themselves, and also just me not living in my purpose, which even going back to that job, I was like, okay, I don't know that like being a stylist really is still my purpose, but just showing myself that I could do that helped me even clear my mind to be like, okay, what do I want to do next? Because now the future that I see is actually possible now.
There's so much in that you just said.
Yes.
I'm like, oh my God. Yeah, I so resonate with what you're saying, like so many parts of that. And you don't really go in the same as you come out if you get a chronic illness. Or maybe could, but I think, like you said, it's a huge opportunity to really look at what is important, and it forces you to reassess a lot of different things in your life and the way that you're showing up. So I want to circle back to the brain retraining, because one thing I try and do on this podcast is break down concepts, because I know when we're in a world and it's just common knowledge, if someone's listening from outside and that they are new to these concepts. I am a brain retraining, MindBody practitioner. I teach brain retraining. You've done brain retraining and you're also teaching it in your course. How did that look for you in this first part of getting well? Was it implementing exercises frequently throughout the day? Yeah, what did it look like for you?
So I feel like for me, it wasn't so scheduled. And I know that some people need that schedule. Like, this is my time to sit down and do this. But what I really liked in my healing process and what I implement in my course is taking that pressure off of yourself to like do things so rigidly. So for me, the first thing was a big mindset shift. So finding that evidence of why my symptoms were able to be overcome, why there wasn't anything structurally wrong with me. And that wasn't just like a sitting down for 15 minutes and writing that out. That was noticing that throughout the day, like seeing if when I'm driving, I don't notice it, but then when I stop at a stoplight, the pain comes. Okay, that's evidence of, okay, it's not something structural. It's the way my brain is processing this. So it's really a practice. A lot of people want something instant, and it makes sense because, if you've dealt with pain, you just want it to go away. But it really was a practice throughout the day. It was checking in with the language that I'm using. Like, how am I talking about pain? How am I saying my pain versus the pain? How am I describing it? And then also doing the meditations, visualization, somatic tracking. So following those pain sensations with curiosity without trying to change them. This was all things I did throughout the day. Like, I feel like I'm not the best at like routines in a way. Like, I want to meditate, but you get me. Like, I love meditating, but like, I'm not like every morning I wake up and I just immediately go meditate for 30 minutes. And then I like can't really do that. I try to, but I'm also like not the best morning person, even though I want to be.
And I'll be too, like a lot of people I think show up in this space and everything looks so perfect, but everyone has different ways of moving through the day and different rhythms. And I think that sustainability piece, and when you're so down and out and when you're really at rock bottom, the thought of having to do so many things, quote unquote, perfect, which doesn't exist, but that is a very typical driving force and personality of someone who does experience chronic symptoms. A lot of it's actually unlearning in the way that we do things as well. So not expecting so much of ourselves to get it all right, to do things really rigid, actually creating a bit of space.
Right. Because especially, like you said, people that have more perfectionist tendencies end up having the chronic illness, the chronic pain. And I think like you said, we have to break down that idea of having to do things perfectly on schedule, very rigid, because we think that the harder that we try for something, the easier we'll get it. But it's actually the opposite. The harder we try, the harder it is with these symptoms.
It can be really hard to get to first of all get that point across, but also lean into that trust, because it's the energy in which you're approaching something. Like if you're clinging on to the outcome, really push. I know for people new to these concepts, it might, I'm trying to put it in a simple way, but it kind of drives a stress response in the body if we're doing it out of, I must be fixed here. I must do this. So yeah, it's the energy in which we do something can have a huge impact on the nervous system.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's not pressure. If you put too much pressure on yourself, it just shocks your body. It makes your nervous system feel like there's a threat, like it's something that it has to figure out. Especially when you're dealing with illness, you're always trying to figure something out. Like you're trying to figure out, what's the cause of this? Like, am I going to make it worse? Is it like you're constantly in your head? And that just creates more fear.
Yeah, more hypervigilance and more fear. Yeah, so many things that you're saying I'm resonating with. So another thing I would love to look into a bit more is you're saying like the grief and other things at that time had an impact on the state of your health perhaps and the symptoms that were coming up, which is TMS. Like I'm not a practitioner in TMS, but as far as I'm aware, the concept that our emotions and unresolved emotions are impacting our physical health and how when we express that can really change the way our nervous system works. So although I work in those principles, it sounds like you had a TMS practitioner or you had support in that area. What realizations did you make around perhaps grief and other things going on and how that actually drove your nervous system to the point where symptoms were occurring?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I feel like for me, like with grief, it's been a long process of me discovering, how I process the grief initially, how I continue to process it, because as we know, things lay in our subconscious. Our subconscious is like always working on the back end. So even if we're not consciously aware of what's going on, our subconscious can be triggered by literally anything in our environment. So I feel like for me, holding on to grief looked like the idea of needed to be sad all the time. And that wasn't something I really processed. Like I knew that like my dad would not want me to be sad, but I just felt like because it caused me to be so sad, like my nervous system got used to being so sad and it didn't know how to handle even good situations, because consciously I'm like, okay, my dad wants me to be happy. My dad does not want me to be sad all the time. My nervous system got so used to sadness, so used to fear that something else could go wrong, that the carpet could be pulled from under me, And so I really had to process that fear around like, it's okay to move forward. Like you won't forget your dad. Like your dad doesn't want you to sit in this sadness and hang on to this. And I think my symptoms were a manifestation of me being like, well, life is just sad now,
Allowing yourself to trust life again, excuse me, and allowing yourself to embrace the good moments, which can be, we both know, really hard after grief, but that's really helpful that you could pinpoint that now as well, because we do get neurologically and with our physiology, we get used to states like conditioned in our nervous system. So that makes complete sense.
Yeah. And it's almost like scary to like feel happy again or good again, or even after dealing with pain and illness, it's even scary to be normal again. Like you kind of sometimes don't even know what's normal because, you're never perfect, because if you were perfect, like you wouldn't be alive. Like the brain is always sending you signals, even if they're just millisecond signals, because that's its job. So you're never just like not going to ever like have pain ever again in your life, but you don't have to have those chronic symptoms. But it's hard to know. Sometimes it's hard to know the difference because you're so in this pain perspective, this pain life. It's hard to know what's normal.
Yeah. I mean, I think I told you I moved through chronic pain 10 years ago now. And I do remember at least for the year after having not chronic symptoms, you know, like I was comfortable day to day, I would still go through that period where I think you even put something on Instagram where you were driving the car and you stopped and it passed and you felt dizzy. I had a lot of those moments because I also had a lot of dizziness alongside my pain. And it was that constantly having to reassure my nervous system. Like I still do it now, but especially when you're moving through the other side of chronic symptoms, you're recalibrating a new normal. Like if you go to the gym and let's say you get sore muscles, it's reminding yourself, this is a normal person pain. You know, we all have a headache from time to time. We all get tired from time to time. And it's actually learning to trust that, like you said, everybody is having symptoms and feedback. That they actually persist is a different story. So I definitely don't think people talk about that enough. Like that whole questioning, is this normal? Is this chronic? And just really, I think the more time after you have, say, overcome or moved past chronic symptoms, the more time that goes past, the more you start to really lean into trust of your body, but also start trusting life again as well, that there can be those moments of joy and nothing's coming. I know a lot of people from living in that fear tend to be in that state for a while.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly what you said about trust. Like it's so hard to trust again, but also like you said, it's a process. You have to practice this. Like you have to reassure yourself. You have to tell yourself that you're safe when you have those symptoms again. And it's normal to have a headache when you're stressed, but it doesn't have to last for 5 days. It doesn't have to come consistently. So I think it's really important to decipher that and take the pressure off of yourself to be perfect and never have a headache again. Like that's not realistic. And I think that was a big turning point for me too, when I was like, okay, I'm going to stop striving for perfection. And once I did that, like my symptoms improved even more.
Did that just look like you reminding yourself to, you know, stop a task when you were trying to get it perfect? Did it look like those little things daily that you were spending a lot of time and energy in trying to get right, and just you coaching yourself and bringing yourself back to present?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, you said it exactly.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely showing us, like I've said consistently on this podcast, showing up and constantly pushing yourself out of your comfort zone with doing things. Like I think about how far I've come with the perfectionistic side, because I've moved through so much of actually just showing up and putting stuff out there when we know nothing's perfect. We know that logically, but to move through that, you constantly have to be seen as a beginner, and also just change your relationship to learning and failure, especially when it comes to productivity, because it is something that I see a lot with my clients, trying to get things right and trying to do things to such a high degree, and then inadvertently getting themselves into that freeze response and anything at all, you know?
Yeah. That freeze response is so common with perfection, because if you try to be perfect, you get so overwhelmed. Like I know, like my brain will literally shut down if I am trying too hard to be perfect and I'm overthinking every move. Like my brain just shuts down. Like I can't be creative. I can't get my words out straight. I can't do anything because I'm putting so much pressure on myself to do things right.
Yeah, totally. So, I'm curious about on reflection, looking back now, your main aha moments, the things that really helped you the most, or the biggest realizations you had. You have already talked on some of them, but were there any more that really stood out to you?
I think that the biggest is that we have more power over our health than we think. And that's not to say that there's not a role for medications. Like, I'm very big on science. I love my holistic remedies, but I also love science. But we have to realize that we have so much more power over our health and our ability to regulate ourselves and stop ourselves from going down a spiral, whether it's an emotional spiral, mental spiral, or a physical spiral of these health issues. So just knowing that, wow, I have the power in this moment, if I'm feeling head pain, to just notice it, not try to change it, describe the quality of it, just picture it as a symphony, and it can actually get better in that moment. Like, that feels so empowering. So I think that's so important for people to know, that knowing that your brain and knowing that you have control over your health in a way is very empowering. I think that's the biggest thing for me.
I agree. I love the word influence, because it takes away, this is your fault, it's your responsibility. Yeah. But I have more influence over my health, or we all have more influence over our health than we are led to believe. We've both been through the medical system, and there's so much conditioning growing up around, like, listen to people that have the answers. And like you said, there's such a place for that, especially when it comes to acute conditions. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to chronic conditions, it's actually just really opening up to the fact that maybe you do have influence over your nervous system state. Mm-hmm. And when you really find ways to harness that, things can shift completely.
Yeah.
It's still so crazy, even though, I've been well for a while. I'm constantly seeing amazing results with my clients. You can still get blown away by some stories sometimes.
Yeah.
Just the power of the mind-body connection.
Yeah, definitely. Like, it still amazes me too. Even with myself, like, sometimes I'll think back, like, wow, I'm really doing this. Like, I did not know. Yeah. Like, is this real?
Yeah, I know. It really can get like that sometimes. And I always like to remind my clients, having been so far out the other side of symptoms, chronic symptoms at least, there is a point where you look back and it does feel like a blip on your timeline. And I know when through it at the time, you're like, when is this ever going to end? I'm going to be stuck in this forever. There's no hope. And so I just right now thinking that I really want to reassure people that you can get to the point where we're at, or even further down the track, and look back, and you'll always remember what you go through, but you can get back to living such a full life when you're open to this type of work.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what everyone wants. Like, they want to have a full life. They don't want to feel like their body is against them. They don't want to feel like their conditions are stopping them from doing what they want to do. So it is so important to remember that, like, this is just a blip in time. This is just a moment in your life. And even though it feels like it's forever, it's not. It is temporary. And with the mindset shifts and the right tools, like, you really can get your life back.
Yeah, definitely. I know that you have recently put out a course, a MindBody course, which is very exciting. And I guess, through your own journey, through your studies and everything, it's been something that's been really, sounds like, very relevant to you, and you wanting to help others in this area. Mm-hmm. So do you want to just explain a little bit about what was behind you putting it out and what is inside?
Yeah. So it's called the MindBody Reconnection course, and it's all about overcoming chronic pain, chronic illness, as well as anxiety. And so obviously the course was sparked by my own journey through chronic pain and illness. And I just felt like I wanted something accessible to people that was a substitute for coaching if people weren't able to do an entire coaching program. Right now I don't do one-on-one, but eventually I will. But I wanted something that felt like coaching, but was accessible. I can't coach hundreds of people at one time. So, I really wanted to have something that could be as accessible as possible to get the word out and to get people really healing. So I created this course, and it's 8 video modules, and I am teaching in the videos about the brain, the mind-body connection. I talk a bit about trauma, self-limiting beliefs, and just overall nervous system regulation. And then I teach brain retraining techniques like thought redirection, somatic tracking, reframing, and other mindfulness techniques. So I have 8 modules. There's a video per module. And then the entire course has 25 worksheets and eight different meditations, which also includes systematic tracking, visualizations. And it really is a go at your own pace. I really focus on not having pressure. Like we talked about, like no pressure on yourself. This isn't school. You don't have to get an A. You don't have to do it perfectly. So that's a really big thing that I focus on. But it can be completed in a minimum of 8 weeks because each module is released per week. So I designed it 8 weeks because that was how long it took for me to get back to work. So I do the principles of brain retraining, and then I also add in my psychology background. So we do talk about trauma and the inner child and the way that things lay in your subconscious, as well as breaking down those self-limiting beliefs and living in your core values. So I really added what I learned in my practitioner training as well, and just the wisdom that I've received throughout my own life, working through grief and working in, creating this business and feeling really aligned in the work that I'm doing. I do talk about that in the course too, because that really does play a big impact on your symptoms, both mental and physical symptoms. So yeah, I really wanted to make it really well-rounded, accessible, and I'm always available for email support for questions or anything when you're taking the course as well, because I know this can be really new for people. So I have a lot of clients check in with me like daily, like, are we sure this is TMS? Are we sure this is mind-body syndrome? Like, what do you think about this? So, you still do get that coaching element with the course as well.
Yeah. I was just thinking as you were talking through the modules, I think you've covered every single base that I also believe.
Oh, good.
Chronic illness in terms of, inner child, trauma work, belief work, living your authentic truth, finding out what that is along the way, incorporating joy, brain retraining, all of that is also what I teach. And I think for anyone starting on this journey, like obviously Chandler's put it all into one for you, but if you are sort of moving through thinking what are the components? They are all the components. And if you've uncovered at least one of them, like you're on the right track, because
exactly,
it's a really holistic approach to overcoming chronic illness. And I think sometimes people like to head in one direction, which is awesome, or they might get well doing a particular thing, but there are so many things we can discover about ourselves, like you said, around living in our purpose. It goes so beyond just getting rid of symptoms.
Right. Right.
It's really powerful.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
I'm glad you got it all there. And I think well done on doing it, because I know how much effort and time goes into creation and just
so much
and helping others. I think it's amazing. So I'm assuming you see yourself in this area, like you really want to stay in this mind-body area and continue to do this kind of work.
Yeah, definitely. It's really has fulfilled me so much, because, it helps me understand like why I had to go through this, because I didn't feel aligned working as a therapist, and I wanted to do more coaching because I could build my own brand, build my own business, really, really get creative with it. And I just feel very aligned. And if I wouldn't have gone through this, I wouldn't have this business. That's what I built my business on. So I'm excited for it to continue growing. I would love to do like in-person events and other workshops and just really spread awareness. Like that's my biggest thing. I just want people to know that healing is possible and be able to see me, who dealt with such severe symptoms, which I didn't even know like what I was going to do, and even overcoming symptoms that I didn't even like think about. Like I just thought that was normal. I'm like, oh no, this is like, this is not normal. You shouldn't be having these symptoms. Like,
no, it's funny. Actually, I kind of gone off here, but like if you look back at the course of your life and there's things that you were dealing with when you were little or younger or your teenage years, and I can look back and there's certain things now like heat rashes and IBS and just things that were never like a huge issue, but looking back, I'm like, that was my body. And
yes, that's exactly me. I was actually thinking like one time I got dental work done. That was like, it was, I think it was like not my wisdom teeth, like a dental crown. And it was such hard work. Like they just like couldn't get the tooth. And it felt traumatic to me. And for like a week or two after, I had vertigo like every day. And I didn't know why. Like there was like nothing was wrong with the tooth. And this was like years and years ago. And I'm realizing now, like, oh my gosh, that was MindBody, because that dental procedure, I was so scared of it. And it just caused so much pain. Like even after the pain was gone, I was still having symptoms. And it's like those things that you don't even think about until you do this work.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. It's so interesting. So where can people find you? And what socials, is that your main port of contact?
Yeah, so mainly on Instagram. So it's at Mindfully Chic, MindFullyChic. Also building my TikTok. I feel like I'm not the best TikTok girly, but we're trying.
I get on there and then I post like 6 weeks later.
Yeah.
It's not good. I'll be on that train with you. I didn't even know you're on there.
Yeah, I know. I'll have to add you because I'm trying. And then my website is mindfullychic.co, and you can find the course on there. I also have an introductory ebook that has a few educational guides. It has 4 worksheets and it has 1 meditation. So if you want to start there, there's the ebook there as well. But those are my main points: Instagram and then my website.
Amazing. Thank you, Chandler. It's been
so
nice to chat. And I hope all of you guys listening are really inspired and just to know what is possible, coming from the depths of literally pain and moving through it. It's amazing. So yeah, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. It was so great chatting with you.